Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. The voice you hear is not that of Charlie Sykes, who is taking a much-deserved vacation now that he's fully vaccinated. But I am Mona Charen, policy editor at the Bulwark and host of another Bulwark podcast, Beg to Differ. And Bill Kristol and I are filling in today for Charlie, or attempting to. Bill Kristol, of course, is the editor-at-large of the Bulwark, major domo guru. Bill, welcome. Nice to talk with you again.
Thanks, Mona. Good to be with you. And we're filling big shoes here. But
yes, we are.
On the other hand, but you already do that excellent Beg to Differ podcast once a week, which everyone needs to listen to. Slightly different, more of a deep dive maybe than Charlie's News of the Day, but an excellent compliment to it. So I'm happy to be on with you.
Thank you very much. Well, Today marks 1 week out since I've had the J&J vaccine. And of course, last night we all learned, or yesterday afternoon, we learned that the CDC and FDA recommend pausing vaccination with this particular vaccine because of the danger of blood clots. And I just thought I'd mention that, this is one of those situations where you really, your emotional brain says one thing and your rational brain says another, right? So the emotional brain says, oh my God, I just got a vaccine. I wonder if I'm going to be one of those people who gets a brain aneurysm. And the rational side of your brain looks up the odds and realizes that it's 1,000,000 to 1 shot against having any sort of problem, right? There have been something like 7 million doses administered and 6 cases of blood clots. And so, you have, I tweeted this out, you have, the chances that I will be struck by lightning are actually twice as high as the chances that I will get a blood clot. All of which is to say, look, you understand that people get panicky about, risks that they're seeing a lot of attention paid to in the media. But there's a world of difference between the actual risk and the perceived risk.
No, that's so true. And I mean, there are unfortunately people die of it or get sick because of blood clots and aneurysms all the time, regardless of the vaccine. Having said that, they found some. I give them credit. I guess I was online yesterday and they were getting attacked from all sides, the FDA and CDC for announcing that they were. What they had discovered. I mean, it's such a small number. It wasn't even discovered in the clinical trials, but you don't get to 1 million people in a clinical trial. So if it's 1 million, you're not going to even see it, or it's going to be one case literally, and you're going to not be able to show that it correlates at all, Mm-hmm. But they found something, they thought, and they paused for, let's see how long they paused for so far, for a day and a half. And I gather that places, at least around here, I've talked to a couple of people, have been able to fill in with Pfizer and Moderna, so it's not slowing things down too much. It would, obviously, if they had to just pull J&J from the market, but I don't think they will. In fact, I rather think what they're planning to do is to announce that people in certain age groups maybe should just be a little attentive and careful for the next 2 weeks after getting the vaccine and so forth, which would be helpful. It'd be helpful if they told people what to look for in terms of, signs that something was awry and all. But as I say, they're being attacked from all sides. Is it going to increase vaccine hesitancy, or they should be more careful and just pull it all off the market? And I think they seem to be doing kind of the right thing. I've got to say, you can't not report something you found. I don't think really it would not be proper for public agency. But I hope now that they'll be able to announce, I think they're meeting today, today or tomorrow, that they're going to go back ahead. They could even, but with some slightly special maybe protocols and so forth for, again, making sure they tell people who they can call if something seems problematic or what to look for and so forth. So I don't know. I feel like this is a case study where, these are always tricky balancing acts, as you said. But maybe they're handling this pretty well. Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it seems like it. I wouldn't be surprised if it takes a few more days because they're going to want to delve into the particular cases
Right.
and, what exactly happened, what kind of blood clots they were, and
Right.
the mechanism. I mean, Anthony Fauci said something about the mechanism of action. They're going to want to look at that, and so it may take a while, and they may get more reports in the interim of other cases. So it'll take up to a week or whatever, but yeah, it seems like they're being rational, and as I say, it is. I mean, it's understandable that people get nervous when there's so much attention focused on it, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, COVID is highly, is deadly in a certain number of people itself. So you have to balance risks. Life is risky.
Much higher number of people, obviously. Yeah, I mean,
Yes, a much higher number.
I was talking with a friend yesterday who said, "Oh, it's too bad because they have a nanny," and saying he was saying that kind of she was hesitant, had vaccine hesitancy, not an anti-vaxxer, not a Trump problem or anything like that, just kind of wasn't certain. She's young, does she really need to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't come from a family where there's a lot of medical expertise and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And but she was kind of getting there, and now this. My friend was saying this might set it back a little while. But as you say, if they do make a serious announcement in a week and it's back on the market, and plus they maybe redouble efforts to get the other vaccines available.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't really increase vaccine hesitancy, which, too much of that is a problem for obvious reasons. But
Yes.
I feel like all things considered, given where we were, maybe we should have committed on this. I mean, what are we, about 80 days into the Biden administration or something? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, not just the amount of vaccine, but the somewhat depoliticization of it. I don't want to exaggerate that, but the people are getting it from all political persuasions, it seems like. And I know plenty of
Mm-hmm.
people personally who are happy they got the vaccine, who, unfortunately voted for Trump and stuff. So,
Right.
and
Right.
even go along with some of the attacks on the lockdown and stuff like that. But I feel like that's been they've done a pretty good job, the Biden administration and the whole, and the network of organizations, which includes the private sector, of course, and state and local governments and so forth, and hospitals in getting this thing out there and getting people to take it and getting people to, understand how to do it.
Right. And, whereas about 6 or 9 months ago, a lot of us were wondering why Europe seemed to be handling the situation so much better than we
Right.
were. It's just the whole COVID thing, and our response was terribly lacking. And now, I mean, at least on the vaccine rollout, we're way ahead of Europe, which is interesting. So
And
is
I think
Great
for all
Britain.
the talk about vaccine passports and the demagoguing of that, which has been really shameful. I mean, that's where the demagoguery has gone to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm struck. I was talking. I was talking to, but a lot of colleges, some colleges and universities are saying they're going to basically require it for students when they come back, as well as maybe faculty and others who work, staff at these colleges and universities. They have special circumstances. They have dorms, and you kind of like, if you were a parent, I think, to know that everyone in your kid's dorm has been vaccinated. Even if your son or daughter has, you still would sort of be more comfortable probably if everyone or almost everyone has. And
Everyone who can safely do so. There are certain
yes,
categories of people
yes,
who cannot.
absolutely.
Right. Right.
I kind of feel like we're going in that direction, that all the, that we're not gonna literally have a vaccine passport the way Israel does, perhaps on an app that everyone just shows quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a lot more convenient, though, if we're going to have test requirements of anything, if we're going to care whether people do or don't have COVID when they get on airplanes, go to theaters, do other things. Being able to show that you've been vaccinated is a lot easier than bothering with another test, right? So I think
Absolutely.
people are going to kind of realize that at some point also. And so maybe I'm kidding myself, fairly optimistic that we get over some of the, even the demagoguery on this.
Well, Bill, you mentioned vaccine passports and the fact that it's a source of demagoguery. And so that leads us into another topic, because one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the recent weeks is that the relationship between the parties and corporate giving seems to be shifting, perhaps. You had a statement that was signed by hundreds of companies, including BlackRock, Google, Warren Buffett, Amazon, many others, saying that they oppose any discriminatory legislation that would make it harder for people to vote. And at the same time, you have Republicans announcing that they are now the party of the common man, that they are the workers' party, and that they are not so interested, perhaps, in corporate donations, or as Mitch McConnell put it before he reversed himself, um, you know, companies should shut up. Or he didn't quite use that language, but he said they shouldn't weigh in on these matters. And a few days later, he reversed himself. And that's actually an irony right there, since who was most associated in American politics with the rights of corporate speakers in politics? It was Mitch McConnell, Citizens United, and so forth. So anyway, for him to now be saying, even temporarily, that he thinks corporations should butt out is kind of amusing. What do you
Yeah, well,
make of this?
he thinks they should butt out in terms of making their views known on voting rights and stuff. But of course, they should keep writing checks to the Republican
Yeah,
Senatorial
exactly.
Committee, and every race he designates is a key one. I've wondered for a while how much the kookiness, genuine craziness on the Republican side, which begins with Trump but isn't limited to Trump, obviously, and how, as it seems to not be receding from the party, but if anything, the opposite, how much that would eventually lead corporate America, businesses in general, businessmen and women, but I think especially kind of the more corporate side of business, because they, well, I'll get to why in a minute, to sort of rethink their pretty instinctive and longstanding, association with the Republican Party. At some point, maybe you get a little bit lower tax rates from the Republicans. Maybe you get less aggressive regulation and more attentiveness to your interests. There's not much pro-union activity on the Republican side. But on the other hand, at some point, the craziness. The one thing kind of CEOs don't like is if you're running a big company, they kind of like predictability. They don't like kookiness. They don't like incredibly divisive fights where they're then asked to pick one side against another in a kind of bizarre culture war way. And even though you could say some of the times the Democrats have been dragging the corporations in, I think it's the Republicans who are generating these culture war issues. And so I think if you're running a big company, you've got a diverse workforce, you don't want to have to, be always, managing that situation. Even it's always difficult, but, making it even more difficult when you have local Republicans setting some of your employees in effect against others, trying to deprive some of your employees of the right to vote while telling the other employees that the last election was stolen. You think, yeah, maybe the Democrats are a little easier to work with. And so I think in a very practical, non-ideological way almost, I've wondered how much corporate America could come over to at least an openness to working with the Democrats. And then you've got the Biden administration, which is moderate as Democratic administrations go. And some of their legislation is okay with corporate America. They want to tweak it. But if you want to tweak it, guess what? You need to negotiate with the Biden administration or Senator Schumer or Speaker Pelosi. And then on something like voting rights, I do think a lot of the business men and women, genuinely and earnestly just think that's a terrible thing what the Republicans are doing, and they want to weigh in on that. So you put it all together, I wonder if we're at a bit of a moment which could end up being significant, where sort of American business reconsiders its longtime allegiance to the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party maybe in some ways realizes it's a big opportunity for it politically to reach out, maybe to abandon a couple of their prize, policy priorities, or not abandon, but, tone down
Modify.
in order to have the support of business.
So if this actually plays out, and one of the corresponding trends is that we see many more politicians on both sides seeking small dollar donations, because with the rise of the internet and the ease of making contributions this way, politics has already begun to change. Has begun to tilt more toward raising money directly from people through small dollar donations. Bernie Sanders famously was able to raise huge amounts of money this way. Donald Trump was able to raise huge amounts, but there's a new term. So when you're trying to raise money from corporations, what do you have to do? Well, you have some nice dinners. Maybe you take them to the ballet. Maybe you are attentive, as you were saying, Bill, to their concerns about the regulatory agenda and so forth. When you're trying to raise money from small donors, on the other hand, you have to do these direct appeals and you have to get people angry. There is a term that has apparently entered the language called fundraising, where, these appeals are getting more and more hysterical, more and more it's the end of the world if you don't donate. We have to stop Biden's, communist agenda, or, things of that nature. And so, if there is a turn by Republicans toward more focus on small dollar fundraising, doesn't that perhaps exacerbate the crazy that you were talking about a second ago?
Yeah, no, that is a possibility. I mean, I do think there's an overlap. I mean, I think the way in which the Biden administration or Democrats should reach out to corporate America is not to be too corporatist about it. I mean, that is, Amazon has leadership who they have PACs that can write checks and individuals who've made a ton of money in Amazon over the last 10 years, 20 years, who can write big checks to super PACs. They also have, I don't know, 800,000 or something American employees. And, there are ways to convince them that it's in their interest for their company to do better, for them to do better, and indeed sometimes to pressure the corporate leadership to be more generous in terms of health insurance or whatever. I think Amazon's pretty good on that, but whatever, different aspects, or use OSHA to make sure there aren't too many work-related injuries, but do it in a way that isn't simply bashing Amazon, but sort of working with them to improve the circumstances for their employees. And you can imagine the same and for Coke and Delta and everyone else, who's been in the news. So I think there's a way in which the Democrats can get beyond the corporate leadership to remind people, including some of these same people who may get enraged and write small dollar contributions, or maybe it's the relatives of those people, that they work for these companies or they work for companies that work with those companies, or, and they're a travel agency that books, Coca-Cola's travel or something. So they have a sort of interest. I mean, this is very old fashioned, kind of old school interest group politics, American capitalism, 2 cheers for capitalism sort of stuff. But I mean, it sometimes incidentally could be a little bad for the country, or a little too much, can go too much in this kind of capitalist, corporatist way, you might say. But a lot of people have an interest in American business doing well, because most Americans work for American businesses,
Yep.
And so, I think just kind of a very simple, almost, kind of old school appeal by the Democrats, and some attempt to think through that in certain policy areas, ways to harmonize the interests of the companies and their employees and their vendors and stuff. You might take the edge off that rage. What did you call it? Fundraising.
Fundraising.
The success
Yes.
of that. But look, you're right. I mean, one problem is, this could end up becoming more polarized. But I don't know. In that case, the Republicans are turning themselves into a party, I think, that appeals to 25%. I don't know, of the electorate, and who are just outside of the mainstream and furious and angry and disaffected. But I mean, these are massive companies, and people work for them. And then there are small businesses that aren't as big, but that are in big trade associations that represent them. And if suddenly a lot of people who work in and around American business start thinking, the Democrats are kind of paying attention to me, the way people in the academy now think that, the way people in the public sector now think that, the way a lot of, professionals, lawyers and so forth think that, it could become I think a kind of a moment, beginning of a important change in American politics.
Yeah, very interesting. And of course, just it's one reminder that donations are not everything. I'm just looking at a list of donations. This was as of September 30th, 2020. But it showed, for example, that in South Carolina, Harrison had outraised Graham by about $15 million. Amy McGrath had outraised Mitch McConnell. Sarah Gideon had outraised Susan Collins by almost 3-1. Cunningham had outraised Tillis. I mean, you can go right down the list. Greenfield over Ernst, and all of those races went to the loser of the money race, but the winner of the race. So it's important to remember that while money is important in politics, it isn't everything. That message matters.
Yeah, and I think these big institutions, I mean, people can be unhappy with them. Maybe they don't like the Major League Baseball. The Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game from Atlanta. I think that was questionable. Maybe they don't like a particular decision by the leadership of Coca-Cola or Delta or anyone else, Amazon. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's just hard for me to believe that Americans are so disaffected with the current political and economic system, one that has on the whole served them pretty well, that they just that being against all these organizations and institutions is really a winning proposition for a political party. It could be winning in an individual race, maybe in a particular congressional district, maybe an individual, someone who's already elected can sort of turn this direction and get himself reelected or herself reelected. But I don't know. It just feels like, what is the Republican base that it really then becomes total? I mean, right now it's a mixture. You've written about this, and Jonathan has very well, I think. It's a mixture of grievance, politics, but also actual just economic interest of an awful, or perceived interest of an awful lot of middle class, upper middle class Americans. If that second part starts to be whittled away and it just becomes grievances, I don't know that that's sustainable.
Speaking of what the Republican Party is about and what it is, last weekend there was a meeting at Mar-a-Lago, where, of course, the Republican Party put more money into Donald Trump's pocket by attending the confab in the first place. But more importantly, they reinforced that they are still completely in his thrall. I think his comments about Mike Pence in his sort of Fidel Castro length speech didn't get enough focus, didn't get enough attention, because it strikes me that once again, so we've had this sort of we've had this reevaluation of what happened on January 6th. The people at Fox News are trying to say that it was it was just patriots, trying to get their voices heard, and there was violence, and that was committed entirely by Antifa, and so on. Nothing to get upset about, as Tucker Carlson said the other night. But when you look at what Trump himself said about Mike Pence, we are reminded what the stakes are here. What did he say? He said he's still upset about Mike Pence because he lacked the courage to do what was right. And what's he saying? He's saying that Mike Pence should have defied the law, that is the Constitution, by failing to certify and read out the results of the Electoral College, which in turn, I guess, in Trump's mind, would have led to a cascade of other responses from other officials, and that perhaps the election could have been overturned. And that's the gravamen there of what he's saying, is that is what he wanted to see happen. And all of those little bobbleheads among Republicans are sitting there listening to Trump say that. And they're like, yep, it's a shame about Mike Pence not having the strength to do what was necessary.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty astonishing, isn't it? I mean, Trump is not giving up at all, not yielding at all, not even acknowledging that what happened was unfortunate, really. He did that for like 2 days and then moved on from that. And all the donors sitting there clapping as he really makes fun in a kind of crude way of President Obama and Mrs. Obama, and then attacks Pence for literally not overturning the election. I mean, that is what's striking, I guess. It's not just, oh, there was some fraud, that's false, that's a lie, but whatever. It's a general lie, you might say. Here he's literally saying that Pence on January 6th, knowing what we all knew on January 6th, knowing that Georgia and Arizona, 2 Republican-run states, had certified the results after careful recounts and with Republican governors and so forth, knowing that everyone had looked closely again at Michigan and Wisconsin. He was saying that Pence should have overturned it then. I mean, people need to internalize that. And this is the guy they're paying court to, whether it's Kevin McCarthy or the donors or others. And now, again, for me, it's not just the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Matt Gaetzes, right? It's the Marco Rubios and Kevin McCarthy's and other, let's quote, mainstream Republicans who remain totally enthralled with Trump. Nikki Haley said, was it just a couple of days ago, that of course she'd support Trump. She wants to run herself in 2024, but she'd support Trump if he ran. Now, what, really? You're going to support someone who tried to overturn the election, doesn't regret having tried to overturn the election, doesn't regret January 6th, regrets only that Mike Pence didn't overturn the election? It's really, I mean, it's not so much Trump himself. It's the continued obeisance to Trump that's really terrible.
Which makes the Republican Party an anti-democratic force in American life. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
But you have some reports from the field, from some GOP efforts, some non-Trump people running in Florida and Texas. Why don't you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I don't have any really inside dope, but I follow these things a little bit. So in Texas, to take the one that's coming up, there's a special election in Texas 6, the 6th congressional district, which is outside Dallas, Arlington, I think where the stadium is, in north of Dallas. That's the district that Ron Wright, the congressman, died unfortunately of COVID, and so it's a special election. His widow is running. It's a one big field, 23 candidates. The two leaders go on to a runoff, and no, it's not party elections the way they do the special elections there. So lots of people running in both parties. All the Republicans, with one exception, are to some degree Trumpy. I mean, Ron Wright's widow is I'd say more of a normal establishment Republican, but she wants to carry out Trump's agenda and so forth. And then there are literally people who worked in the Trump administration and people who are boasting that they've endorsed Trump in the past. And there's this one fellow, Michael Wood, whom I talked to on the phone once. I don't know him at all well, but he's a Marine, former Marine, and he got in as explicitly. I mean, I remember some of his advisors were saying, "Well, don't emphasize that you're not for Trump and that you're the kind of want us to get beyond Trump. Just keep quiet and talk about how you serve the country and honorably, and you're from the district and have a nice family and all this." And he said, no, I need to be, explicit about this. So he's explains that he's running partly because of January 6th and we need to be beyond Trump. He doesn't want Trump's endorsement. He wouldn't accept it, he said. That was pretty striking. And so it'll be interesting to see how he does. I don't know that he'll have as much money as some of the other candidates, and he's never run before, so he had no name ID to start with. He's getting some decent national press and some press down there, I gather. I think the Dallas Morning News even endorsed him and said, he looks like, I'm not sure it was a final endorsement, but, but a very favorable editorial about him as someone the voters in that district should look at. So that'll be interesting. It's a little bit of a snapshot into where the Republican electorate is, and it's an independent, since it's a jungle primary, everyone can vote. There are some Democratic candidates, and one of the, who are very respectable Democrats. So if you're a Democrat, you probably stick with the Democrats. Maybe a few would come over and vote for Wood. But it'll be interesting to see whether, he gets 5% of the vote or 20% of the vote or 25, or even makes the final two, just in the sense of what market is there for this kind of message in the Republican among primary voters.
I sent him a check, but I'm not optimistic.
No, I mean, and we've gone down this road several times. I mean, I didn't, a lot of people, a fair number of people called me in 2018 and 2020, should I think of running? I've been a Republican, and I would often, people should make up their own minds. And I was very, happy to help them if they do. And you never know. And sometimes it's good to run, even if it's a real long shot, because you get a good experience and so forth. And sometimes the long shots come in. But running with Trump, either as president or at the top of the ticket, just was, if you weren't a Trump support loyalist, was going to be very, very difficult. And you're going to have to straddle, or you weren't going to straddle and just get beat up by the Trump people. Maybe it's a little different with him out of office, but, not that it has been very different in terms of the overall, as we were just saying,
so
spirit
far
of the Republican Party. And then in Florida, Matt Gaetz's district, an Air Force veteran, it was reported today, and this is true, I think, is planning to run. He's, again, from these are both people who are from the district, have real roots in the district with their families, have come back to the district. So that's obviously, unless Gaetz resigns, that's not until a Republican primary a year from now. So a little more than a year from now. So that's a different kind of timetable. But so some things are happening that maybe offer some hope. It's interesting, those people do want to run. They want to run as Republicans because they don't they're not quite moderate Democrats yet. I talked to them about that, and they
Mm-hmm.
just feel more comfortable for now, at least in the Republican Party, and want to give it a chance. And I think Adam Kinzinger's, has supported Wood in Texas, and Liz Cheney. I think there'll be a certain number of people who will try to step up for them. It'll be interesting to see how much of these Republican establishment types, though. And this is the most worrisome, sort of depressing thing. This is their moment. I mean, they've all said, "Oh, we just went along with Trump as we had to. There was no choice. You know, we could beat him in the 2020 primaries.
Mm-hmm.
We preferred him to Biden because Biden would be so terrible for us." But, deep down, of course, we want a sane Republican Party. Okay, well, here's a chance, right? Here's a chance in Texas. Here's a chance in Florida. How many of these Republican donors, Republican big shots, former Republican elected officials are going to say, yes, this is important? And these are just 2 congressional districts. There are many, many other places where one can imagine this will happen over the next year. The more they step up now, the more likely it is for it to happen, because, of course, people will say, yeah, I can run and I can get the support of a bunch of people, and they'll do fundraisers for me and so forth. So I think, it's sort of time to put up or shut up for all these establishment types who claim to be very reluctant and very, torn about their need to support Trump. Well, now they have a chance to support non-Trumpy conservative Republican candidates. Let's see if they step up.
My worry is that the information, silo that they're all in being what it is, and so many of the people who vote in Republican primaries getting their information from Fox or Fox adjacent sources, they just live in a different world, in a different reality. And I don't know, until we can get a handle on that, I'm not sure we can have political progress, but maybe. Do you want to say a word or two? I wrote today about police violence. I'm getting a lot of pushback. People are very angry at me. They think I was justifying bad police conduct, which I did not really do. But these 2 cases that came up are very difficult, and I was just trying to make some distinctions, like the case, this awful case in Minneapolis, where an officer. It seems to me, I believe her, that it was a mistake that she shot him instead of using her taser. Obviously, it's a horrible tragedy, but I just was saying it's not like Derek Chauvin, who was really, in my opinion, depraved in the way he squeezed the life out of George Floyd. This strikes me as a little different, but I said it, and now people are mad at me. But we don't have to spend time on that. Let's talk a little bit, if you would, about Afghanistan.
Let me just say a word about. I ask you,
Oh,
I'm just
sure.
curious, the people who are mad. I mean, you're made very, you were clear that you were not defending anyone's conduct, and I think that I don't know, Willie, I haven't looked at it nearly as close as you have. If this was a case of reckless manslaughter or something like that, people should be prosecuted for that. I mean, there's no question that being a police man or woman doesn't exempt you from, making from reasonable judgments and being held accountable for terrible mistakes, even if there's not the intention to kill someone, obviously. And that's different from Chauvin, it does seem like. But I'm just struck. I mean, what do you think the reaction is? Kind of left-wing activists who just don't want to even hear anything okay about the police, about that we should understand even the difficult jobs police
I think
officers have? Or
there's a tendency, again, to just do these sort of, Manichaean black white, evaluations of things, put it into a slot, police bad, motorist good, and there's no room for nuance. Look, I mean, one of the things that distressed me was that, I saw a bit of the press conference with the city, the mayor of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, who, somebody asked, I guess, the police chief or the city manager, one of the press was demanding, that this cop be fired. And the thing had just happened. And he said, well, they said, don't you think she should be fired? He said, well, I think she deserves due process, and then we'll see. Maybe, but due process has to go. And people just were completely uninterested in that. And that struck me as somewhat similar to the attitude of many Republicans that we saw so often when we would say, look, the rules matter, procedure matters. norms matter. And people who supported Trump would say, no, we're all about just the outcome. The outcome is all we're interested in. And some of us pushed back and said, no, these things are incredibly important to a well-functioning polity. And I see a little bit now of that on the left, which is, just fire her, immediately, verdict first, trial second, right? As the Mad Queen says, I think in Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, no, I think that's really an important point. And I also, just politically, I would say I did this conversation with James Carville that people can watch or listen to if they want.
I listened to it. It was
Good.
great.
Yeah, it's good, I think. And he's very smart. And it was struck, and he's seen a lot of polling, that defund the police, fairly or unfairly, hurt Democrats in 2020. Some Democratic member said, "Oh, this is too much. We have to just defund them all. We can't reform them." And I was struck that Jim Clyburn, the South Carolina member of Congress, I think number 3 in the House, and the man who sort of saved Biden's presidential campaign, it seems like, in South Carolina, said, no, we defund the police. That is crazy. We need police officers. We need to recruit. He was particularly interested in recruitment. We need to train them better and recruit better ones, and I assume discipline them appropriately and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's very important politically for the Democrats. They need to be the party that wants to fund good police work, not the party that wants to defund the police. And funding good police work also means funding the kind of soft power, you might say, side of the police, community engagement and all that, and really does mean that. And that was also incidentally a key to some of the successful policing in the 90s and in the 2000s that did reduce the crime rate. Some of it was locking people up, but a lot of it was actually had, let's call it, a liberal side as well as a conservative side, if you look back at what Bill Bratton and police commissioners like that did. So anyway, I think what Clyburn said was very interesting, shows it's very intelligent of him. But I am worried that, you just get a few members of Congress and, as you say, a few activists and screaming and yelling, and it just makes it so easy for the Republicans, irresponsibly, to say, see, the Democrats just hate all police officers.
Exactly. And by the way, there are other reforms that I hope Democrats will consider if they are in the mood to reform the police. And that is, paring back the power of police unions, which has been kind of scandalous in how they can let police get away with murder in some instances. So it's important to be aware of the possible reforms short of defunding all the police departments, which is an absurd idea and only hurts the Democrats, as you point out. Just in fairness to my critics, I will say I also addressed the case of this Army medic, Nazario. It struck me in a certain way. I felt like it was I watched the video. I felt like his reactions were odd. A lot of people were angry at me about that. They think he was completely reasonable. Individuals are going to differ about that. Certainly the police behaved badly. I thought he behaved oddly. That's all I was saying. Sometimes when you don't cooperate with the police, it gets them hepped up. And it looks like that's what happened, that he kept not complying with their demands. And the situation tragically escalated. And, I'm not saying that the police handled themselves perfectly either, but I just thought that was a more complicated case as well. All right. Finally, let's say a word about, I guess, the unlamented passing of a bad person. Bernie Madoff died.
It was. So you and I think, given knew fair number of people. He of course, this whole Ponzi scheme was very much targeted towards the Jewish world, the New York world of wealthy investors, but also a lot of organizations, some of which were wealthy, some of which just thought he had a good reputation, and a lot of them were Jewish communal organizations and universities like Brandeis, as I recall, and so he and I think
Elie Wiesel,
someone like Elie Wiesel, So he was apparently a very skillful con man, and had this Ponzi scheme going. I think one of the clever, I don't call it in detail, but one of the clever aspect of it, I remember someone who knew Wall Street much better than I explaining at the time, was his whole line was he had figured out how to kind of take a lot of the risk out of investing and get a very steady return with conservative investing. And as my friend said, it was a little ridiculous. Once you get, if it's 9% every quarter or something like that, or 9% rate every quarter, you should be alert that can't really be the case. No one has figured out, how to do that. So it should be 5% one quarter and 13 the next. And the fact that it was so steady was itself a giveaway. But it was a funny thing. He didn't prey on the kind of simple-minded greed of people, I want to triple my money overnight. It was a very
Right.
sophisticated scheme. This is a pretty safe way to get a above market return. And this guy's very well respected, and he's investing Elie Wiesel's money. So what could be wrong? And he really built it up into a giant Ponzi scheme. And it was terrible. I gather they've been working very hard to claw back all the money that others made from this and get it back to the original investors, but that's just a massive effort at this point. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
there was a fantastic film made about this. I can't remember the name of it, but I guess there are one or two movies about it. Just, but it was the one of the most horrifying aspects of this entire thing was that all of the institutional checks that should have caught it did not. And he was honored by, the New York Stock Exchange. I think he was even like on the board of the New York Stock Exchange or something. I
mhm.
mean, this just like, it's mind boggling that, that the con could have gotten to that level. Really
It shows that
amazing.
a lot of wealthy individuals and a lot of institutions, that in each case you'd assume there's all these people who work for them and they'd be carefully looking at all this. And I mean, an awful lot of times that's not always the case. People, people are people, and they're busy, and they kind of, someone tells them this one's legit, and they don't really do much careful due diligence. Any of us who's on the board of a charitable institution or a think tank or anything, you get sort of tired sometimes with all the due diligence and the audits
Mhm.
and the,
Yeah.
internal controls. But, you see something like this and you really understand why that, it sort of gets back to your earlier point about due process and sort of the, some of the procedural hurdles you want to have in a free society, not just a free society, but in a society that depends on, the smooth functioning of markets and to protect people
Yes.
from fraud. I mean, it's not just,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you do need
He was Bernie Madoff in a way, he was the beginning of an era of grifting,
that.
wasn't
Yeah.
he? I
Yeah.
mean, since then we've seen so many huge frauds. I mean, maybe he inspired them. I don't know, but that Elizabeth, what's her name, who did the blood test
Yeah.
thing, and of course the greatest of them all, Donald Trump, got
But
elected president.
But it is a good reminder that one can look down, and a lot of these wealthy people do, I suppose, on the people who are checking sending in $25, not realizing it's a recurring donation and really, money they shouldn't be sending in,
Right.
and can't afford to send in to the National Republican Congressional Committee and all. But yeah, the wealthy and institutions are also susceptible to a more sophisticated kind, perhaps, of fraud. And it really does. This is where it isn't just business. I guess I'll maybe bring it around this way. It isn't just business as usual, or just, I mean, capitalism is always going to have that tendency, and that people who try to exploit it in that way. But that's precisely why it needs to be guarded against, and I think disciplined pretty strictly, because you want to have a free-flowing marketplace where we can all buy stuff online and people can solicit us and offer us deals, and
Hmm.
you want to have a certain level of trust. That's what any society and any economy requires to function. You really want to come down hard on the frauds, both whether it's an elderly person getting cheated out of $25 a month, or a big investor getting cheated out of several $1,000,000 by Madoff.
Right. And he did die in jail.
Yeah.
So that is just. All right, Bill Kristol, thank you so much for joining me on this fill in for the great Charlie Sykes. And people can tune in to Beg to Differ, which will be dropped on Friday. And tomorrow, the Bulwark podcast will be back and do this all over again.